They say you can trace the moment everything breaks, but for me it didn't arrive with a crash. It seeped in quietly through ordinary days and half-spoken sentences, through smiles that stopped reaching eyes and nights that ended with two people facing opposite walls. And if I'm honest, the choice that ruined me didn't feel reckless at the time. It felt inevitable. Like gravity finally winning after years of resistance. Because loneliness doesn't announce itself with drama, it settles in like dust, coating the life you thought was solid until one day you breathe it in and realize you reach choking. And that's where I was at 32, married for 11 years, mother to a bright, watchful little girl named Mila, living in a house that looked warm and complete to anyone passing by but felt like a stage set once the doors closed. Because Ethan and I had become experts at appearances, at routines, at coexisting without touching anything real. And I kept telling myself this was normal, that marriages went quiet, that love matured into something practical and subdued. But deep down I knew the truth was uglier. I was fading, shrinking into the corners of my own life while Ethan disappeared into work, into screens, into a version of himself that no longer reached for me. And the worst part wasn't the lack of affection. It was the way he stopped seeing me, stopped asking, stopped noticing. Like I had become furniture he navigated around without thinking. And I tried, God, I tried. I filled the silence with domestic perfection, with clean counters and folded laundry and packed lunches, with bedtime stories and smiles for Mila. But inside I felt like I was screaming into a void that never echoed back. And then there were the weekends. The one time Ethan seemed to wake up again, when his friends came over like clockwork, Jared, Liam, and Chris. Men who had been part of our lives for so long they felt permanent, safe, unthreatening, until suddenly they weren't. Or maybe they always were and I just didn't see it because I wasn't looking for escape yet. And that's the thing no one talks about. How temptation doesn't always come from desire. Sometimes it comes from recognition, from the shock of being seen after years of invisibility. Because around them, Ethan laughed again, his voice lighter, his posture looser. And I watched from the edges, refilling drinks, smiling at jokes, playing the role of the easygoing wife while something bitter and aching twisted in my chest. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, I became aware of small things. Jared's confidence when he spoke to me directly instead of over my head, Liam's quiet check-ins, the way he asked how I was and waited for an actual answer, Chris's humor that cut through the heaviness and made me laugh before I could stop myself. And none of it crossed a line at first, not technically, but it crossed something inside me because it reminded me of a version of myself I thought I'd lost, the woman who felt interesting, desirable, alive. And I hated myself for how much that mattered, for how quickly I began to anticipate their visits, how I started choosing my clothes more carefully, adding a touch of lipstick I pretended was for myself, telling myself it was harmless even as my pulse quickened under their attention. And Ethan noticed none of it, or worse, noticed and didn't care. And that indifference became the final ingredient, the thing that made everything else combustible. Because when you feel unwanted long enough, even the smallest spark feels like salvation. And the night everything shifted wasn't dramatic, it was painfully ordinary. A backyard filled with music and beer bottles and familiar laughter, Mila tucked away in her room, headphones on, safe in her own world, and Ethan leaving early, distracted, apologetic in words, but absent in every way that mattered. And I remember standing there after he drove off, knife still in my hand from chopping vegetables, listening to the sound of laughter drifting from outside and realizing how alone I felt in my own kitchen. And I walked out there smiling, slipping back into the version of myself everyone expected. But something was different. The air heavier, the looks longer, Jared's words sharper and more deliberate, Liam's silence louder than any confession, Chris's attention steady and curious. And I felt it, the shift, the moment when harmless attention turns into something charged, something dangerous. And I went to bed that night beside a husband who slept soundly with his back to me, my mind racing, my body buzzing with a feeling I couldn't name, not guilt, not yet, but awakening, like something dormant had been stirred. And that's when the real betrayal began, not with actions, but with thoughts. With fantasies I never invited but didn't push away either, with questions that scared me because they felt honest, Like whether wanting to be wanted was really such a crime. And after that night, my inner world grew louder while my outer life stayed exactly the same, Ethan distant, Mila perceptive, the house quiet in all the wrong ways. And every weekend added another layer, another look, another almost touch that lingered just long enough to be remembered. And I let it happen not because I planned to destroy my life, but because I was starving and didn't know how to stop reaching for food. And the line finally blurred on a night when laughter turned soft and slow, when wine loosened caution, when words slipped out of my mouth before my conscience could catch them. A reckless suggestion masked as a joke, hanging in the air long enough to change everything. And the silence that followed told me I wasn't alone in what I felt, even if none of us dared name it. And from that moment on, the path was set. Not straight, but inevitable. Because once you acknowledge a desire, pretending it doesn't exist becomes impossible. And when Ethan left for his trip days later, indifferent and unaware, I felt something inside me snap, not with rage, but with clarity. And I made the choice that would haunt me, inviting chaos into the quiet, mistaking intensity for intimacy. And the night that followed wasn't the fantasy my loneliness had promised. It was awkward and charged and heavy with hesitation. A collision of emotions rather than bodies, and even in the moments where I felt desired, where attention wrapped around me like warmth, there was a shadow underneath, a knowing that this wasn't healing me, just distracting me from the wound. And when it ended, the emptiness returned sharper than before, the silence suffocating, the room suddenly too real. And then came the sound that shattered whatever illusion I had left. My daughter's voice in the hallway, soft and confused. And in that instant, every justification collapsed. Because it wasn't about Ethan anymore. It was about Mila, about the version of myself I had just fractured. And the aftermath was worse than any confrontation could have been. Because there were no words, no explanations, just distance avoidance messages that faded into nothing and a child who looked at me differently without knowing why. And Ethan cruelly began to show up just as I was drowning in regret, bringing flowers, asking questions, touching me like he used to. And every gesture felt like a knife because I no longer deserved them, because I was carrying a truth that poisoned every tender moment. And I started to understand that the most devastating part of my choice wasn't the act itself. It was the realization that it hadn't fixed anything. It hadn't filled the void. It had only widened it, leaving me hollow and ashamed and desperate to undo something that couldn't be undone. And I questioned everything, my marriage, my morality, my identity as a mother, wondering if redemption was even possible when the damage lived inside me. Unseen but permanent. And now when I look in the mirror, I don't see a villain or a victim. I see a woman who was lonely enough to mistake attention for love and bold enough to step over a line she can never erase. And I tell this story not to be forgiven, not to be pitied, but to be honest, because loneliness can make you dangerous to yourself. And if someone hearing this feels that make that same invisibility, I want them to pause, to reach for help instead of escape, because some choices don't come with second chances, only echoes, and you have to live with the sound of them forever.